I had already checked every box. I was in the C-suite at 38.
Were you really happy? Or were you convincing yourself you were happy?
Yeah, I thought I was happy. A lot of high-performing leaders, they don't know themselves without their job. Like what they do is who they are, and there's no daylight in between them. So I was no different. And then it burned to the ground. I didn't have my health, I didn't have my job or my career, and we didn't have any place to live. I wasn't going back. That person was gone. I was like, I'm not accepting that this is over. Like, absolutely not. Like,
hello and welcome to the Unlock Lab. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Tosca Di Matteo, your host, and I'm thrilled to have my guest Susan Miele on for this amazing conversation we're going to have around identity. And you know what? I have this amazing bio of her that I want to share like right off the page because it's a beautiful recap of what she offers the world. Susan is a writer, a scholar, a former C-suite executive whose work explores how identity is dismantled and redefined through life's transitions. Drawing from her own experience and her PhD in human and organizational systems, she writes at the intersection of personal transformation, theory, and leadership, examining how we think about belonging, success, and change. And let me tell you, I've read her book cover to cover, and it was a real page turner, but we'll get into that. She's a lifelong learner and dedicated yogi. Susan infuses her writing and speaking with mindfulness and compassion. Her work invites readers and organizations alike to see disruption not as a loss, but as a profound opportunity for growth. And she lives in Portland, Maine, one of the fantastic places I love to visit. So before I hand it over to you, Susan, to do any kind of intro that you want to add on to that, to give some fun facts, whatever you want to do, I just want to say that I'm so glad that you reached out to be a guest. And, you know, at first I was like, oh, you know, the strategy mind of me is like, oh, how is this fitting? And then I got your book and I was like, this is like everything that I love to talk about, right? Transformation and what happens when we hold on to our identities and our, desires too closely or anything really. And we hold on to anything too tightly and what we miss as a result. So I'm really thrilled for this conversation because I think it's going to help so many people to understand how this under the radar topic of identity can really change the game. And I think that most people come to see identity as something to really look at when one is stripped from them. So if you're watching or listening and you've lost your job or you've lost some identity as an uncle or as a mother, as whatever, I think this is for you. This is for everybody who at some point in their life will say, oh, I can't use this label anymore, or I don't identify with this label anymore. So that's my preamble. But Susan, I just want to hand it over to you and say thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited about everything we're going to talk about today.
Thank you for having me. And one of the reasons I'm particularly excited about being with you today, Tosca, is I loved seeing you speak a couple of years ago at the Maine Women's Conference. And I felt like we had an immediate connection, number one. And I've been listening to your podcasts and just enjoying them immensely. So it's a great honor to be here for that, from that perspective. The second reason or third reason is that the book, because my pivotal moment for my first disruption in identity was perimenopause that went undiagnosed, the leadership part of my story gets lost a lot because menopause is so front and center to sort of my particular collapse. And it's so front and center in social media and mainstream media on the shelves of our local bookstore that the leadership piece of how that identity rupture helped me reshape and become a better leader often gets lost or overlooked. And I spent almost 40 years in human resources. So that's a really important part of me. And so it's really exciting to sort of extend my conversation to a latter part of the book, as opposed to a lot of the focus around what I've been speaking about, which is the rupture itself, how I got so attached to my identity in the first place, and then sort of the unraveling that followed. And I don't often I haven't had as much opportunity to speak about the rebuilding from a leadership identity perspective, and that second chapter in my career in the C-suite, and how my unraveling really unlocked my potential as a leader in a way that's quite unexpected.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you so much for the kind acknowledgments and your enthusiasm for being here on the podcast, for being a listener. And thank you so much for sharing that. There's so much of this book that, we may not cover in depth, right? Like you said about the undiagnosed, menopause that play a huge role, as you spoke about. And, I've spoken a lot about, you know, over the years about, like even denying health problems, or not, not seeing the signs, or, not being willing to see, or like waiting and waiting because how could this happen? Right. At this age, or, you don't even think about it. So there is I think you bring a huge awareness in this book that I hope everybody reads and sees that piece of it too. That whole health journey, right, is a big part of the story. And thank you for bringing that up.
Yes. And for me, particularly because I'm one of only 12% of women that go through menopause before 45, it was particularly, so it's helpful to women, the people that might be in my cohort of under 45-year-olds who went through menopause. It's very lonely. And particularly 20 years ago, it was very lonely because perimenopause didn't even really have a name. It was just the transition. And of course, I didn't know that was what was happening to me for at least a year after my resignation. But then I was sort of in denial about it for quite a while. I bought off on the gaslighting that my job was too stressful and that the sort of menopause was coincidental. I didn't really connect the cognitive decline and sort of culmination of my what almost was a mental breakdown with perimenopause until much later. So I had like two distinct stories, which is I had a very stressful job that I left unexpectedly because of my performance was declining. And all the doctors said stress, anxiety, depression. My daughter was only 5 at the time when I resigned. So I had a small child. My husband had a big career. We had a big house. Like we had a lot of responsibilities, like many people in their 40s, when you're up and coming and you're in that acquiring mode, right? You're acquiring titles, you're acquiring things, you're acquiring children, you're acquiring spouses. So it was, it's still a very lonely topic for some women who are in the C-suite, who don't want to talk about it, who go on the antidepressant. And don't get me wrong, an antidepressant or an anxiety might be the exact right thing, but 25% of women in their 40s get prescribed an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety, which is twice the rate of men. So that struggling that we do when we're in trying to manage all those things and suffering in silence because we don't know what's going on, it's still happening. So my work has evolved to the identity focus, but it started when I left corporate 3 years ago, really trying to normalize the menopause conversation in the workplace, which I still do that. I still speak in the workplace and try to destigmatize the conversation and really just educate people on like, why don't we talk about menopause at work? It is 50% of the workforce is going to go through menopause. It is a completely natural thing. And I think if we could just look at it more broadly, it wouldn't face the same stigma. And 1 in 3 or 1 in 4, depending on which research you read, of women leaders wouldn't start to think about looking for another job or in fact step out of the workforce in their late 40s and early 50s, when like the average age of a newly appointed CEO is 52.
Right.
But somewhere between 25 and 30% of women are stepping out of the workforce because of menopause related illness or symptoms that they can't manage. So there's already a dearth of women in the leadership pipeline. So normalizing this and making sure we can help women move through it just as naturally as it should be moved through is a big part of my passion. The book didn't quite go in completely in that direction because the identity lens I felt was a helpful framing, because it doesn't just happen to your body. It happens to your
Right.
mind. It happens to your how people see you. It happens to your social connections. It's so much bigger.
Right. And to your point, right, that the awareness and this moment in time where, you know, this is being brought to light to understand the implications. Not only is it important for the women who are experiencing it, but it's important for everybody else in the workplace to understand, to be able to empathize, to be able to be in non-judgment, right? And be supportive of this huge life transition that has really never had the spotlight on it that it has now, in terms of how challenging it is, and how challenging it is to make the right decision for you. And, you know, and I'm also thinking about, even right when in menopause, or when in any kind of health, let's just say period, let's just say it's a treatment period for whatever, maybe it's cancer, whatever it might be. There's also identity in that,
Of course.
you know? And so, you talked about in the book, and also you kind of alluded to it already, right? You're in your mid 40s. It's like pinnacle career, and you worked really hard, really early, and for a really long time to do the work that you've done in executive HR positions. And so here you are at this moment where, you know, the way that I think I saw it in your book is like, there was no option, because your body was saying to you, and you're done, lady. You got to pause, right? Like, I love the name of the book for so many, all the double, triple meanings. But, you know, can you talk a little bit about what this like work identity was for you early on, in terms of it really shaping who you thought you were, and the whole, you know, your wholeness of your career journey?
Sure. So it started pretty young. I started overachieving first in school. It was like a way to feel like I belonged, to feel like I mattered, to feel seen. So first it was academics, and then it transferred really easily into the workplace. So once I got into human resources, right after I finished my undergrad work in the 80s, I started in human resources right away, even before I graduated, because I finished school at night. And I was really good at HR. Like, it came naturally to me, as it does to some people, and not others. But it was something that I really enjoyed. And I had great mentors, and I had really great opportunities early on in my career that I could just climb the ladder. So I got, busy doing that. And I kept thinking, each step on the ladder was like another way of, it's another piece of recognition, right? My ambition became my purpose, is the only way I can think to describe it. It's like I conflated ambition and purpose. Like, they were one and the same. I was like, my ambition is to be the next biggest C-level person, because I enjoyed it. I was making an impact. I was building and developing teams. I was helping businesses. I felt like really good about it. So it felt like it was just one and the same. And that's pretty true for a lot of high performing
Yeah.
individual contributors, but a lot of high performing leaders. They don't know themselves without their job. Like, what they do is who they are, and there's no daylight in between them. So I was no different. And because I was successful and I was being rewarded from that success, and I did reach the C-suite before I turned 40, my goal was to be there by 40, and I got there at 38. It was like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I loved it. And the rewards were great. And I grew up in a lower middle class community just outside of Boston. It was all blue collar. My father worked in a shipyard. We often were strapped. So the financial rewards were like nothing I ever could have imagined.
Well, and let me ask you this, because I mean, you say you were happy, right? And like the rewards were there. Were you content, right? When it was like, oh, you get that next thing, like, could you ever sit in that and revel in it? Or was, or no, like you check that box and like the next day it was like, and what's next? Like, what was that for you?
Yeah, I think because of like my confusion around my purpose, I could never rest because if ambition was my purpose, then the only way that I was going to fulfill my purpose was to keep moving up and taking on more responsibility and making more money. So there was a part of me that when I sort of wasn't able to handle the role and I was diagnosed with stress and burnout, it was a part of me that was like, that could be true. I didn't feel like in my heart it was true because I had been doing it for a long time. And it wasn't like my daughter was a brand new baby and it wasn't like that was a new job. And we had navigated a lot of difficult situations in that company that I worked at for quite some time, including 9/11. And we were a financial technology company. So it was a very stressful time for everybody, but for those of us who had employees on Wall Street and in the towers, I mean, it was months of like stress and rebuilding and figuring all that out. So it never felt right, but I was like, I guess it could be right. I haven't ever taken a break. So perhaps I just need a break. And I I hadn't taken a break for a lot of reasons because once I got the next promotion, I lived into that, right? We bought the big house. We had the beautiful cars. Our daughter went to private school. Like it was just like, it was that, we were living into that, like I said, and like many people do in their 40s when it's like an accumulation decade, I think, looking back. So it was like, I never stopped to consider, well, could I do something else? And then the universe showed up and said, I needed to do something else.
Yeah, just so I like the way that you're describing what I'm hearing, and tell me if I have it wrong, right? Because I was asking, like, were you really happy, or were you convincing yourself you were happy, or like what I'm hearing is you were pleased.
Yeah, I thought I was happy. I mean, I have a great husband and still have him 30 years almost now. Our daughter was happy. We lived in a wonderful neighborhood. And because my outsized identity was my job, I was like, everything like this is great. Like it didn't feel bad to me. It wasn't until I looked back that I realized how lacking in dimension that was and how perhaps that was never going to be sustaining for another decade or another 2 decades. Maybe it was. I don't know. I never had the opportunity to find out whether I could have just moved to the next bigger job within that Fortune 500 company and kept going from there. But what I know retrospectively was that it was very limiting in terms of like outside interests and very limiting in terms of my own way that my values as a leader, my values were kind of hard wired. They were like success, achievement, drive. They softened when I returned to leadership 7 years later. It now feels like it was a blessing. And at the time, I wouldn't have said. At the time, it was a crisis. I spent the first 2 years just trying to figure out how to get back to where I had been. Like I was like, I'm not accepting that this is over. Like absolutely not. Like,
oh my gosh, yeah, and I totally want to get into that. And what I'm pulling out from what you're saying, because part of this, right, is my hope is that for the person who's listening, that they're paying attention to, is there something that I'm missing? Is there a sign that I'm missing? Is there, like what's here for me? And I think that what I'm hearing as you describe it is, yes, you could be happy. Yes, you could feel content. Yes, you could be proud of yourself. And maybe there's even more that you don't know about. That's possible. That's kind of how I'm hearing your story.
That's exactly right. Like outwardly, before my unraveling started, I felt like I had everything. We had a beautiful daughter. We had a beautiful house. I had a great marriage. I had a great job in the city. Like I felt like everything I had written in my little identity story as a young adolescent, teenager. I was like, I'm going to work. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to get out of this little blue collar town. I'm going to wear fancy clothes to work and I'm going to buy a big, beautiful house and it's all going to be great. So like that was a big part of my story. And then when I was living into it, I was like, I thought I had it all.
Right, right. And then the universe is like, yoink, right? Like as you describe it, the universe is like, you know what? Yeah, I'm gonna need you to slow your roll for a hot minute. And right, this is where like the health piece comes in and that deeper
Hmm.
dive. And and then as you say, right, for 2 years, it was just all about going back. Right. It was like, oh, I need to like, okay, let me get back to where I was. Like, oh, here's this health disruption. Here's this like, um, time of my life where everything's upside down. Um,
Yeah, I thought
and
it would be a short break, right? I knew
uh huh.
it was apparent that I wasn't going to go right back to the sea level.
Right.
I couldn't quite get my act together to get out of bed,
Mm,
even some days. So it was like, okay, well, but we're going to make all these adjustments. We're going to sell our house. We're going to take our daughter out of private school. I'm going to have a minute for the first time in
right.
30 years to take a
Right.
break. And then I'm going to go back. Like, I'm going to figure
Right.
out what's going on. I'm going to get the right medicine. Again, not knowing yet still
Uh
that
huh.
it was menopause. Um, I'm going to figure it out and then I'm going to go back and I'll be able to explain it, right? It won't be that long of a break that I go back and say, well, what have you been doing the last year? And be like, I had a breakdown or I had menopause. Like,
Right.
not that cool in the early 2000s. I didn't know how I was going to explain it, but for not even for a moment did I not think I was going back. And
Right.
then less than a year into my break, our house burned down. The new house that we
Right.
bought, the one that was the downsizing, was meant to be the reprieve. Like, I didn't have to go back to that big of a job. I didn't have to, like, early we were taking like the downsizing steps we're now thinking about as we think about real retirement now. We were making our lives a little easier, taking some of the burden
Right.
off of all the things we had accumulated. And then it burned to the ground. And so I was like jobless, careerless, not just jobless, like careerless. And those outward um, possessions, those other things that defined my success, were now gone. There was very little left. The house was destroyed in a matter of hours. And I just remember standing there that evening and the next day and thinking, everything's gone now. I have no title. I have my health was suffering, which for anyone who suffers from health issues, at the end of the day, without your health, none of the other stuff matters. And that can be, to your earlier point, any kind of health crisis can be a real identity challenge. Especially if you need to change your life because you can no longer do X, Y, and Z. I didn't have my health, I didn't have my job or my career, and we didn't have any place to live, and I didn't have anything. Like, I didn't even have any clothes or nothing. So it was like, okay, I still need to go back, right? We're going to rebuild this house. We're going to figure this all out. And then I realized somewhere in that rebuilding process of rebuilding the house that I also had to rebuild myself. I wasn't going
Mm.
back. That person was gone. Like, there was no going back
Right.
to that. That narrative ended. So I had to figure it out.
Yeah. And first of all, I just thank you so much for just sharing so much of your story and the journey. And it makes me you know, just honor that the process that we often go through in transformation is it's not a one step thing. Oh, this thing happened. I figured it out now. And here I go. Right. Like you're very much like, oh, and then the universe also was like, and we're just going to burn the house down because you're not about to start that job. You're not ready yet. Like it's crazy. Right. And we talked about like, even in our pre-call, right. The retrospect of that. And I think it's important because it's very hard to keep perspective when shit keeps happening in our lives that keeps piling on. You're like, WTF? Why? Am I doing something wrong? Like, and then we can be hard on ourselves, right? And it can be this woe is me and this victim. And we have to go through those processes.
Yes.
And
Yes.
like you said, this was like now in the process of the rebuilding of the house that burned down and then losing all the possessions, then like you awoke to what was really there for you to learn and to do and to explore. So is this when the identity stuff came in or
The
of
identity
understanding
stuff
the
came in probably another, not quite 10 years later, but when I
Okay.
went back to school to get my PhD. So on
Mm,
my journey of rebuilding uh, my identity and what really is same but different, which I think is probably the case in most
mm,
identity ruptures. You rebuild. Some of the things are the same, some of the things are different, and some things you add and some things you take away, right? That's the possible selves theory within the identity framework. And so as I was rebuilding that part of I always loved school, and I went back to
mm,
school. I started at 49 to a doctoral program, and I realized how interconnected all of these pieces were, and
mm,
how the identity piece was formed at a young age and it stuck for a long time. And that is almost what made it harder, because I had little identity disruptions, but none of them really slowed me down. Like I didn't really meet a challenge that
mm.
I couldn't face until I met several right in a row. And so I think about the framework from a coaching perspective. And I think about when I went back to leadership and played a role as a coach to the people on my team. Sometimes the struggle is the path. And to your point, all we're doing is trying to get out of the struggle. And sometimes trying to get out of it just piles on more, to the very point that you were making. It's almost like,
Right.
if
Getting out of it, trying to get out of it versus go through it. Right.
right.
I talk about
Yes.
that all the time about you, like we want to go around their emotions versus go through them, which is actually how they transform and alchemize. But I want to pause and just get real clarity on how you define identity, right? Because I'm kind of saying like labels but it's so much more than that. So I'd love to hear Miss Susan Miele, PhD, help us understand identity even more by defining it, describing it.
Yes, I like to describe it super simply, like three legs of a
Mm,
stool. It's, who are you? How did you get here? Because that's the piece that sometimes requires some work, right?
mm,
Why was my job so important to me? And
mm,
I know that now. That's part of what became clear to me in writing the book. I wouldn't have been able to tell you that 5 years ago. Maybe I would have told you pieces of it, like some of the things I said about wanting to get out of Somerville and wanting to, live a bigger, more successful life. However, I defined success by big job, big house, big life, big car, all those things. But that's no longer how I even think about success. But back then, so that's who we are. How did we get here? And where are we going? Right. So you have to think, most times we think about it very one dimensionally, like, who am I? And if you ask someone who they are, they usually start with their job or perhaps their family. But we think about our identity rather narrowly. And so part of it is, in terms of the theory that I share in the book, is there's all different ways to look at identity, right? You can look at my identity in relationship to others, my identity in reflection of others, my identity in my own story. So there's different theories that I bring into the book to
mm,
help people look at identity in different ways. I particularly, as I said earlier, I like the narrative identity lens because it frees people to realize that they can be the author of their story, and that they perhaps authored the origin story and they didn't think they could change it. And
mm,
that you have the pen in this situation and you can rewrite your story. I'm not going to suggest it's easy. It could be easy for some people. It was not particularly easy for me, and I know it's not easy for a lot of people when they face, major ruptures in their identity. And oftentimes, the biggest roadblock is that they get stuck. You get stuck in, like, for me, I got stuck in, like, I need to go back,
mm,
and until I could really let go of that, I couldn't go forward. And
mm,
I think about people who have gone through a divorce and they're like, that was my story. Like, I was going to ride off into the sunset with this person and that was my life. And now I can't imagine rewriting that story. So they just get stuck. So unsticking is a big part of being able to move forward. But I think the simplest definition of identity is, who am I? How did I get here? And where am I going? And like always, not always as in like every day, but being cognizant of that, because where you're going matters too, right? And what you're doing now matters to where you're going. And that could be as simple as choices that we make around our health or our jobs or our partners. But where do you want to be next? So the pieces take on different importance at different times in our life, but I think thinking about them and understanding your own agency in each of those pieces is why I decided to write the book through the framework of identity theory, to give people something that they could hold on to and say, I see myself in that story, but it's a different story. But yet
Right.
identity theory is universal. So you can use it to help whatever your story may be.
Yeah. And you talked about, again, in prep for this call, right? That like the challenge is when we get really attached to like one or maybe two, right? Because we are multitudes. I say this, we are complex. We are multitudes. We have multiple interests. We have multiple talents. We have multiple roles in our lives that we play. And so, when we're really holding tightly to something, or we align all our value and all of how we define ourselves by like a few things, I think my perspective, I'd love to hear yours. My perspective is it keeps us in a box. It keeps us constricted, and it makes us less flexible for the change that comes our way.
Oh, completely, particularly if you're defining yourself through the lens of someone else.
Mm.
And that so much of my ambition came from my childhood of not being seen. And I kept working to be seen, right? Part of the bigger job was like, well, if I get the biggest job, then I'm going to be seen and I'm going to be recognized. And because I was seen and recognized in my career, because I was rewarded for it, and like school when I was younger, I couldn't get enough of it.
Right.
It was like all the I was like in a desert as a child, not getting. And you read my book, so it was not terrible, but I was not very well known in my family. I'm a
Yeah.
middle child. I was not particularly seen. I was loved but not seen, and so I never felt like I mattered. So then I mattered in a job, right? I mattered in my job.
Yeah. And then it's like, let me hold on to that because I've been craving this my whole life. There's so much, there's so much in your story that like I identify with. And I think a lot of people can identify with, right? This idea of, do I matter? Can I feel seen? And to not diminish that we have these needs, right? And that we hold on when we get these things, but sometimes we hold on too tightly and we don't realize actually that we can validate ourselves, right? We can see ourselves, we can know ourselves, we can identify our needs, and ask for others to support us with what we need, all the things, right? So I so appreciate, because this work goes so deep, right? Because like when I talk about, and when you talk about like leadership and how your leadership shifted, this shit goes so far back. Like, you know what I mean? It's not about like 2 years ago you were let go and that was hard and the thing happened, or you had a bad boss. Like you had a few, no. The stuff of real transformation in leadership style and leadership approach it requires looking at the depths of who we are, how we identify our values, what matters to us. And that's also what I wanted to talk about today is your leadership transformation, because it was so huge. So I know that's a big door to open, but I'd
Yeah.
love to enter it wherever you want to enter that door of shifting your leadership, from what was it actually, to how did you approach leadership, to what did you, where are you now with what you think leadership, how you want to lead and what you think it ought to be?
I approached leadership in my 20s, 30s as quite performative, right? That makes perfect sense based on how I just described what I was working towards, right? I was working towards the next job, the next promotion, the recognition. So it was very performative. It was check the box, get the thing done, and move on to the next thing. So it was defined, like I said, by success, by achievement, drive, put a high performing team together. I didn't give much thought to like, there were a bunch of mini me's. I didn't really look for diversity per se. I looked for people that had the same set of values that I did, which was somewhat limiting. It was a bunch of high potential, high achieving people, but not necessarily particularly diverse or dimensional, so that we couldn't really rely on the collective, right? We were just all moving that way, right? We weren't growing laterally. We were only defining our success, even as a team, by like what thing we accomplished and what we were going to, get recognized for. And human resources recognition can be scarce. And, for us, it was always like, we're going to get the next thing. So it was very like, those values are not inherently in and of themselves bad. They're just limiting in terms of how you see the world. You're always kind of looking forward. You're not looking sideways. You're not looking back. And frankly, I'm not sure that I was growing very much. I feel like it was a conveyor belt. It wasn't growth as much as it was just keep doing the same thing and repeating the same, and because it worked, right? And again, as in the work that you do with leaders, how often is that the case? When the thing you do is working and it gets you your next reward, recognition, and then it stops working.
Right.
That's a different kind of identity crisis, because then you're like, I don't actually know any other way to be.
Yes.
So now I work in a new culture, or I got a new boss. And for the last 20 years, my performative style worked, and now it doesn't work. Like, that's a whole coaching mountain to climb.
Well, I feel like this is so right. This is such a, relevant conversation, because now we have, more generations in the workplace than we ever have. Right. And people are looking for different things than they ever have. And not everybody's looking for the same thing anymore. And that's often delineated by the generations, but it's not just that. It's more multidimensional than that. And then, and then it's like, wait, the way that I've led with a big stick this whole time, and that's always worked. And all of a sudden it's like, nobody gives a shit about your stick. They don't want to show up to work. They don't give a shit about the paycheck. They want to be, fill in the blank, right? They want to be treated this way. They want these types of things. They want that type of flexibility. And it's like, now what? Because it doesn't mean you're a bad leader. It doesn't mean, it's not about judgment. It's about what else in your toolbox now can you access to lead differently that actually is effective in a new age, in a new world.
And I think there's three things I think that were important for me that I hope I hope they're relevant for your audience. One is that really understanding my purpose as a chief people officer, chapter 2. And my purpose was no longer ambition. My purpose was to try to enable others to be the best at what they could be. And so I had a completely different lens on how I no longer had a stick. I no longer measured success by what the next achievement was. I measured it by the team, how the team was coming together collectively, what each of them individually wanted to accomplish, and how we were going to all work together to support the business success in reaching those goals. So the shift in my purpose was quite profound, from ambition to really helping teams and companies grow to be the best that they could be. So that was monumental, number one. Number two, my values shifted completely. They softened from those things that I mentioned already to compassion, curiosity, honesty, bravery. I was no longer willing. I knew losing a job wasn't going to bother me. Nothing was going to, if you go through what I went through in 7 years and you get back on your feet 7 years later in the C-suite, you're like, I'm
invincible at this point. Throw whatever at me.
Once I got back, I was no longer afraid of what might happen if I
Mm.
screwed up or if I didn't get the next promotion or I didn't get the next raise. I didn't measure success like that at all. I measured success from the collective of the team and our impact on the company, which is a huge opportunity for human resources people in particular. But for me, that's how for the 12 years after I returned to the C-suite, I just measured my success so much differently and my values were so much softer. And I
Yeah.
was so much more, I believe I was so much more relatable as a leader because I felt like first chapter, I was a bit standoffish, right? I was like not particularly human. So that's the third point. I was I was much more human, having been humbled several times during that 7 years, that I was much more human and I could relate to humans much better, which is, the irony is not lost to me that I was in human resources. And I probably should have been able to do that much better early on. And many would say that I did and I could, but it was different. It was different. I was coming from a place of, I was a safety net for some people. I wasn't going to push them to the point of break. Like I was just much more human is the best to describe it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I love that you share, right, that what I'm hearing and what you're sharing is that as you uncovered the truth of your identity, the multitudes of your identity,
Mm-hmm.
then how your values shifted became more in alignment with the truth of who you are.
Yes, it was like I let go of that polished professional shell and like kind of just went back to the girl who grew up in Somerville, who worked hard to put herself through college and knew
Yeah.
that she could figure anything out and that I had more gifts to
Mm.
offer than just, making more money or buying a bigger house and going on nice vacations. I was like, I have I need to expand my horizons so
Mm.
that I'm more fulfilled. And now, I'm just much more dimensional and I have been since that time.
Yeah. Yeah. And you talk about, right, the shell and, AKA the mask. When you had that shell or that mask, like, did you know you had it or there's just no awareness, right?
No, it was so tightly
Yeah.
worn that there was no daylight between
Yeah.
me and the mask.
And
It was one and the same. And it was all of it. It was the clothes,
yeah,
it was the car, it
right.
was the house, it was the whole package.
Yeah. And this really makes me think of how much, when we're in environments, I don't care, workplace or otherwise, and we might be able to see somebody in this performative, in these masks, and it's really hard to hold compassion for that sometimes, right? When we might be the recipient of the lack of compassion or what have you. But like the conversation just reminds me that we, first of all, we can't change anybody else, right? They're on their own timeline. And second of all, right, to have compassion and say, this is how this person can show up right now. And what does that mean in terms of how I can show up in the best version of myself without, like, I think you sharing your story, it helps provide this like perspective to say everybody's on their own journey.
Yes.
And all you can do is plant seeds. And I don't know how you view this as a leader now, right? But like you probably see people who are trapped and stuck. What is your approach for when because you've been through the mud? What do you do when you see other people who are maybe operating how you used to be?
I feel like I was a much better leader coach in my second chapter than I was in my first chapter.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I've always been a big believer in coaching, but in my first chapter, it was very perfunctory. I had a coach because I was promoted at a young age and I took advantage of it and it was great. And I've studied coaching when I worked in a consulting firm, but I really met people where they, in my second chapter, being able to meet people where they were and being able to help people see themselves, right? See that that performative self may not be serving them very well, or see how they are operating outside of their values and how that might be straining them. So I could see things differently that I wouldn't have been able to see earlier on because I was right there with them. And I can think of a particular young man that I worked with a while ago, and we had worked together at one company, and then we a few years later worked together at a different company. And this company was a tough culture. And he thought the only way that he could get the attention of leaders was to act like them. But that was so outside of who he was that it was really not good for him. And he was a hard case. He was a hard coaching case, but I kept coaching. Like I kept saying, is this how you want to show up? Is this who you want to be known for? This isn't the same. You're not the same person that I worked with at the last company. And that's okay, as long as you're okay with it, because this person doesn't feel okay to me because it feels like you believe the only way to get along is to behave in a way that is highly outside of your comfort zone, to let go of your values and adopt the values of these leaders. It took a while to get through to him. In fact, he had to leave the company in order for it to eventually get through to him. But now he's been in a new job for 3 years. I just talked to him the other day. He's doing so much better. He's like back to like, he's thriving. He's been promoted, I think, twice in that 3 years. He's building a team underneath him. And he was so struggling because he was going against his core values because he believed that that's what it was going to take to be successful. And I think how many, I can probably count dozens of times that I've seen that, but being able to really make it my leadership priority to help him see it. It wasn't my priority to change him. I wasn't,
right.
He
You
had
were
to
just
decide.
like, my role is I'm going to try to put this mirror in front and I'm going to try all the different angles. I love this story. Like, because that's, I feel like that's really all we can do is, hey, if you're interested in seeing this, I'm just going to show you. And sometimes that requires being direct. Sometimes that requires saying the thing that maybe they're not ready to hear or can hear. But the idea of experimenting with the approaches to help people see what's really going on and what will be of service, and letting go, to your point of like, can't change him. And trusting that the seeds are enough that if it's in his, path to figure it out, then trust that you are a beautiful part of that journey.
And sometimes it was daily. It took me very direct conversations with him daily, holding up the mirror. And I think about old me, and I would have not had the patience for that. I would have been like, you either get on the bus or get off the bus, and the bus is leaving. And however you evolve, you evolve. Like I wouldn't have, I invested so much because my purpose had changed, and helping others realize their goals and dreams was so important to me and my purpose that I was like, and I just knew in my gut, like he was also a young man, just in his early 30s. And I felt he was going to regret that values conflict at some point in his life.
Yeah.
But I had to, I hope I wasn't offensive. I know he really appreciated it. But it was a lot of effort. And I've, in that same company, there was someone else that I was not successful with. So it's not like it's been successful all the time.
No, right. Of course. And to not have that expectation, right. On oneself. But also I think there's, I like to think there's something, around, soul contracts, right? Like that people are put in our paths for a reason. And when you feel compelled to invest, right? Like there's I feel like there's a reason for that. And then there might be people that you're like, I'm not investing because, however you understand it for yourself. But, I think that our intuition in who we want to continue to, poke and prod and support and push, is really powerful.
Yeah, and
And
it takes a
Mhm.
courageous conversation sometimes, right?
Yeah,
Because I was like, there was a lot of unpleasant conversations with him
right.
around this, but I was like, I could see how far he had veered from his core.
Mm,
And having done that in my earlier career and having the opportunity to reconcile it,
mm.
um, albeit after some crises, I was like, well, I could maybe help him avoid a crisis or maybe not. Um,
Right, right.
and in that case, I did. I helped him
Yeah,
avoid, hitting a wall at some point. He may hit a wall at a different point. Who knows? But I
yeah,
know that that was helpful for him to be able to finally light dawn and be
yeah,
like, I'm not acting in accordance with my values. And this will eventually wear me down. Something, the universe will eventually show him that that
right,
lack of alignment is not sustainable. And who knows how long it
right,
could have been sustainable for, but it's
right.
not sustainable. And I think when
Yeah.
we push and push and push, eventually something breaks. And
Yeah, and
sometimes we just keep pushing through it because that's what we know. We're taught to do that.
yeah, and I think that I think it's easy to become jaded around this because we can see examples where it's like, you know, where it's people in powerful positions, right? We don't see them hit the wall, right? And so it's like, wait, this isn't necessarily true. It is true, and maybe that wall is that they never actually, they never reached the potential that they could have, or they never really found happiness. Like we don't, it doesn't look like, oh, that person got fired because they were an asshole. It looks like that person was miserable their entire life, so I think I I think the statement is extremely true, right? That when we are out of alignment, with our values, we don't really know ourselves, and we're operating from ego, like 100%. That we will hit a wall, and whatever that looks like is different for everybody. But you talked about something that I want to come back to, right? Which was the patience that you had, and I think the patience is so connected to the pause. And how do we find the patience? And how do we know how long to pause? And a lot of times this comes up when people are in the in between, right? When it's like by force or by choice, like now I don't have this purpose in my life, or I don't have this thing that I'm driving towards, whether you were let go from a job or you left a job because you knew it was, so I love to hear what you've discovered about time related to pauses, and how best to think about it, because I think people, we're in an impatient society, right? We just, oh, okay, like you said, right? You were like, let me just get back to that thing. Let me get back to that thing. And we don't give ourselves this space and time. So yeah, like what counsel do you have on that?
So the way I talk about it in the book is it's called liminality. It's like the space between
Mm,
two knowns, right? The door behind you is closed and you're in that metaphorical hallway and the other door hasn't opened. So you're kind of just in that dark space. Like you're for me, that liminality was okay, I now have no job and I have no house and it's pretty dark in here and I'm pretty stuck and my health was deteriorating and it had been stabilizing before the fire and then it deteriorated because of the trauma and the grief and the stress of going through losing everything. So you're kind of in this liminality, and so how long is different until you figure out how do I get myself unstuck? Am I stuck? Am I struggling to go back? Do I know where I'm going? Do I know how I got here? So like answering those identity questions while you're kind of in that pause, in that liminality, I think is it could be very useful. And giving yourself permission that the pause is an opportunity to try on possibility. And now in this day and age, right, that's not a like back in the 80s and 90s, like you were, you worked at the same company and you had 5 years on your resume. And now people are much more open to possibilities and possible selves and taking a year off to travel or a month off to go to a yoga retreat or to go back to school or do something that you think is going to bring you life. Because when you start to like feel that stuckness and like your life force is draining out of you, how do you get unstuck? How do you find the things that are going to bring you joy again? And whether and for a lot of people that is work. And for me, it was work. It still is. Like, it's still a big part of my identity is my work. It's just not ever, it's not all of my identity. Now I do nonprofit work. Of course, I'm a writer now. I love academics. Getting a PhD was probably one of the hardest things I ever did. I practice yoga. I go to the library. Like, I just so much more dimensional and so much more at peace with whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and I'll figure it out. And that unsticking yourself, I think, is step one. Permission to know that the pause is not permanent. Is probably they're not in order, sequential order, the steps, but permission to know that the pause isn't permanent, but sometimes you need it. It's like essential sometimes to stop, even if it's for a minute or a day or a week, like just to stop and be like, is the want? Is the next big job what I really want? Is the next big paycheck what I really want? Or do I want freedom, peace, a family, to travel? Like, what are all the things that are going to make me happy? And sometimes it's a job, and that's okay. Like, it doesn't have to, you don't have to be multidimensional, but you to just give yourself a moment to really reflect on it. I might have told you this when we did our pre-call. My husband loves to work. He'll be 69 this year. He really can't imagine life without working. And I said to him recently, a lot of people say, like, when your deathbed, you wish you would have worked less. And he was like, I'm not going to say that.
I think my husband is going to be the same person.
And he was very clear.
He loves his work.
He was very clear about it.
Yeah.
There was no ambiguity. He wasn't like, if I were to get hit by the proverbial bus tomorrow, I'm good. And I was like, okay, that's okay. Like, just own it and carry on. And he's really good at it. And it brings him a lot of happiness. So cool.
Yeah. It's like not projecting, right? Your journey, your truth about what truly fulfills you and what you actually want onto other people. It happens all the time. And I think that, gosh, it's so limiting. It can be so limiting, especially in these pause moments where, we're listening to people that maybe aren't the best people to listen to give advice, because maybe they've never even been in a freaking pause. Maybe they've been operating out of fear and scarcity their entire life. And so it's easy to get kind of bad counsel in these pauses. Early in my career, I remember a mentor of mine saying, don't leave a job without another job. And that job got to the point where I woke up with butterflies in my stomach, afraid to look at my emails. And like, the best thing I did was to let that go and not let that continue to manifest in my body. Because at that point, my body was screaming at me like, you can't do this anymore. And I love what you shared too about the permission for the pause, and it can look a number of different ways. And everybody has different privileges and everybody has different opportunities. And I don't care who you are. I don't care if you've got all the financial resource in the world. You can still get in your own way by not giving yourself permission for what you need, right?
Yes. And you can conflate like the what you need and taking a step out or step back as like diminishing yourself, when in fact you may not be diminishing yourself at all, but because whatever conditioning you have around how you got to where you are with your own identity story, you might be, how often do you work with leaders who are trying to prove something to someone unnameable?
Right.
They don't even know who I completely lost track of who I was trying to impress. I had already checked every box. I was in the C-suite at 38. Like, I lost the plot. My story was coherent only to a certain point. And then I was like, why am I doing this? What's the next thing? Like, I certainly didn't need a bigger house. I didn't need more things. What was the point? But I think if we don't take that moment to examine the why, we can get lost and continue on because we just don't give ourselves permission to take a side path or
Yeah.
take a moment to
And
be like, how did I get here?
and I think that pause, right? It can look a number of different ways, right? It can look like I'm stopping this whole thing right here, right? I'm quitting this job or whatever that, or it can just be like every day I'm just doing less of this thing to create more space, right? And that it's not an all or nothing thing. Um, and that I think everybody that goes through these journeys of the liminal phase, as you describe, right? It looks different in terms of, where your comfort level is. And it's also like, you know what? Honor and trust where you are and honor and trust what's comfortable for you. And frankly, your nervous system, you know, because some people, right, are just gonna like be so uncomfortable with stopping any activity. Like I'm thinking about somebody that I know who's like, you know, in between things. And it's like, they don't know how to even, you know, take a weekend and not think about it. You know what I mean? Like that. And so
Yeah,
I
so
think
we
it looks
hold
different for
on to
everyone.
that, right? We
Yeah.
hold on to that because we're scared. It's
Yeah.
scary. It's scary to
Yeah.
take a step out. I, I, like
Yeah.
I said, retrospectively, my unraveling was a blessing. In the
Mm-hmm.
moment, it didn't feel that way. I mean, it felt
Right.
like a catastrophe of like magnitudes I describe now. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
this is it. It's over. Everything I've worked for is gone, and there's no coming back. And yet, and I really enjoyed consulting, and I had a really nice job, but somehow it always felt like a slightly diminished version of myself, and I couldn't let go that I knew I had the potential to do the C-level job in a different way. So I couldn't let it go. And so I eventually found my way back. But recalibrating is perfectly fine. I
Mm-hmm.
could have spent the rest of my life as a consultant. It was a wonderful job with wonderful people. But there was something that I just felt wasn't, I had to give it one more try. And if it failed that second time, then I would have my answer. Like,
Yeah, you had your calling and a deep knowing that this just wasn't in 100% full alignment. And I love that, you know, that's the thing, right? Like if something is 1% off, right? Or we do this thing only in very certain situations. And so we just kind of don't worry about addressing it. These are the things that when we address it, when we look at it, when we can honor it, that's what's game changing. These, you know what I mean? Like that 1% off that you felt or however you know, whatever
yeah,
quantity you want to put to that, but that you had the courage and the strength, and the fortitude to say, and the belief to say, I think I can close that gap. Like, I think there's something better in more alignment. And gosh, isn't that what the world needs right now, is to say, in the face of what we're facing, in the face of such challenging times, to say, to still hold the hope that, but this can be better, but I can live a life of more ease and more patience and, you know, stronger conviction. And I can live, you know, in my values and not have to compromise. And that's a really hard thing to, I think, to instill in people. It's all still possible, you know?
yeah. And I think if we like look in the mirror and ask ourselves how much of this is ego and how much of it
Mm,
is like it is aligned, like the ego question is a big one, right? Like our
yeah.
ego drives a lot. And, you know, you read my book, so you know I still susceptible to ego. Like I was let go at a job I never expected to be let go from. And while my experience of unraveling gave me strength to move through that very quickly, my answer became an ego driven answer, which was to go get another job that was
Mm,
not a good job for me. It
yeah.
wasn't a bad job, but there was no ease in it.
Right.
Zero, except for the fact that I had the skills to do the job. The culture, the people, the product, the locate, like there was no ease, zero ease. And I thought, well, I guess I still need to keep learning this lesson. The good news was because I have more strength and fortitude and dimensions, I didn't stay. I stayed.
Uh-huh.
I met my commitment to help build the team and help the company go public. And then had a heart to heart with my boss and said, this
And
is,
that's it, right? Like, I think the journey is like, we learn faster, or like we see the signs sooner, or like we can respond, it's like we can't expect like, okay, I've learned that lesson and it's done. No, honey. Like, these are the deepest lessons of our life, right? And like, they're going to come back, or, in one shape or form, like, but staying present to it and aware of it means that you won't find the dark caves are as dark or as long as they used to be, because you are committed to, showing up for yourself first and foremost.
yes, exactly. So helping people to see that, I think will it helps move quicker through that stuck phase, that liminality phase. It's like, oh my God, I'm stuck. Let me get my toolbox out now that has way more tools in it and say, oh, I am not operating in alignment with my values now. My purpose is now, all they need from me in this job is to help them go public and grow the team. And I was like, okay, let me just get really clear on that and just do that. And then I'm out. I wanted to honor my commitment to the
Yeah.
company and to the people that I had hired. But I knew like this was not going to be the long-term
Right.
replacement for the job, that my feelings were hurt when I was let go. So I had to, like, I don't know, proof again. That whenever you think you're trying to prove something, you should probably just take a sec.
Take a sec, take a pause.
Take a
But,
sec.
and listen, I think a lot of people are feeling stuck right now, and I think the first step is to be aware of the stuckness, right? And for those listening, I'll pat you on the back, and say, yeah, you're stuck. That's great, because there's still a lot of people out there that don't realize it, and
No, stuck
or
is their normal, right? Stuck was my normal
yeah,
for so long. I was like,
yeah,
that's just
yeah.
normal.
So, my gosh, we've gone in some beautiful directions. So there's two questions that I have. The first is there anything we didn't cover that you feel like makes a lot of sense to bring up? And the second piece is, so I'll just pause that so I don't ask two questions at once.
I don't think so. I think when we were thinking about what were the messages we wanted to be sure we covered, I think we covered them plus a few extras. So I'm
Yeah,
feeling pretty good
yeah.
about
Well,
that.
we zipped a few in there.
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. So first of all, again, I love memoirs. Like, that's my genre of choice. And I loved that yours was both a memoir and also informational, right? Around the theories that you've learned in getting your PhD and in your personal life. It's just, I love that blend. Inspiration for when I write my book, just saying. Although I'm not going to get a PhD, I tell you that. But
Sometimes
kudos to
PhD is
you.
just a PhD in life, you know.
Yes, my PhD is in life. But kudos to you for doing that. And at this stage, you're such a light and a reminder that everything and anything is possible. Your story is testament to, yeah, what's possible, to your strength, to looking at the hard things, to taking the hard pauses and reinventing yourself and redefining yourself, re-identifying yourself. And, your calmness, your groundedness is, to me, so present and beautiful, as hey, this is what's possible on the other side,
Thank
So
you. Thank you. And
thank you.
I think the framework, the identity framework, it's like you take what works for you from it and you leave the
Sure.
rest, right? The book's not a self-help book by any stretch of the imagination. It's more like, here are all the ways you can think about this that might help you either unstick yourself, recognize what you're going through, understand how you got here. Like, there's
Yeah.
enough in there, I think, that it could help a lot of people sort of reframe how they might be thinking about their identity.
100%. And I mean, there's a reason why this is called the Unlock Lab, because it is intended to take what works for you, take what resonates, leave the rest and come back for more. You know,
Right.
that's what it's all about. And speaking of coming back for more, for folks who are interested in learning more about, the talks and work that you do with organizations, like where can they find you and what do you want to share about, the kind of work that you offer the world now?
Yeah. So right now I'm still speaking on menopause in the workplace, helping to normalize that conversation. And as long as people will have me come talk on that subject, I will. I hope in my lifetime there'll be less interest in talking about it because it will be normalized. So that's my higher order mission right now. But I write at the intersection of identity and transition. So in the work context, I'm also talking about that as it intersects with leadership. So LinkedIn is my primary social media. I have a website, which is susanmiele.com, and I do write on Substack monthly. So those are the places to learn about my work and the extension of the identity conversation into other equally, hopefully interesting ways of looking at life through the framework of theory.
Yes, and all of those links will be in the show notes for anybody who wants the quick, easy link. And so I'll ask one last question, which is, for anybody watching or listening that feels that stuckness, that feels the frustration of not being where they want to be, what is your one piece of advice you want to leave with people today?
To stop being so hard on themselves and just sit with the discomfort. And that is a really hard thing to do, sitting with discomfort. We're wired to fix things, to fix ourselves, to fix the problem, to get out of the discomfort. But one thing that yoga taught me is that it is the discomfort where the biggest growth comes from. So as hard as it is, that's what's going to bring the light.
Mic drop. I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Susan, for being here, for imparting your wisdom, for sharing your story, for being so vulnerable and transparent and honest. This is exactly what brings me so much joy to bring these conversations to light. So I'm excited for everyone who's tuned in, and thank you so much for being on the Unlock Lab.
Thank you, Tosca. What a pleasure.